Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I share the usually weekly adventures as I DM a group of players at my friendly local game store through Out of the Abyss, which is the 5th edition Underdark adventure. So when last we left our intrepid party, they had just entered what's called the Rockblight and had quite the adventure with a ghost that unleashed horrifying visage on them, and they were like, what are we going to do next, kind of thing. So because one of the players had gotten aged 40 years, another player I think got aged 20 years, but that player was a half elf or no, a wood elf, so it wasn't quite as dramatic. But the other player had been doubled in age from 40 to 80 as a tiefling, so it was quite dramatic. And there was, I was trying to figure out what to do with the age rules and things like that, which we'll get into here in a moment. Want to mention a couple of things real quick. One, I had a couple of people reach out and say, "Hey, are you going to post the next, video? Because we really like them." And we didn't play this past week, which is why this video is a little late. So we are playing again next week, which is Thanksgiving week. I polled the players, and they still want to play Thanksgiving week. So there should be a video next week. But we did not play the last session. Every now and then we do miss a session. Rarely, but it happens. So, and I also appreciate the comments. People saying, "Hey, where's the video? I really like these videos. They're helpful." These videos don't always have the most views, although they get a steady amount of views, but they have the most engagement. So, people commenting and that sort of thing and asking about it and saying, hey, they're really helpful. So, I appreciate that. And I do plan to keep going. So another thing I want to mention, I posted a review in this channel. Go check it out if you have some time on the new Volo's Guide to Monsters. And it's really good. I'm really impressed with this book. So, that's the limited edition preferred store. It's like once they're gone, they're gone. They're not printing anymore. And that is a beautiful cover. And this is a very cool book. So if you haven't already checked out that video, the review I posted, it's on my blog at shaneplays.com, and it's also here in the YouTube channel. Definitely go check that out. I think it's well worth learning about that book. I think it's probably my favorite 5th edition book so far. I'm really impressed with what they did with it. All right, moving on. So, age rules, what I landed on, and I think I talked about this a little bit last video, was I didn't quite know what to do with the age rules. There's no official age rules for 5th edition. Evidently, they didn't have any for 4th edition either. Last time they had age rules was, I guess, 3rd and 3.5, which I think I'm kind of disappointed in that, because if you're going to have effects in the game like monster abilities and whatnot that age your characters, what does that do? I understand, yeah, the players and the DMs can use creativity, but age, and maybe they're trying to be nice and not do ageism and that sort of thing, but age does have effects on characters. Youth versus youth versus experience. I guess that's taken into account with the experience system and the wisdom stat. But it's just as you get older, you get elderly, you do have some physical impairment. It's just how it is. In real life, um, I'm in my early 40s, and I definitely don't have the same energy. And I can even tell, my memory and stuff is not as sharp as it was when I was 20. And who knows what it's going to be when I'm 80, if God allows me to live that long. Um, so anyway, and again, if you don't want to have age stuff in a game, that's fine. But if you're going to, and Wizards of the Coast did this in their game system in 5th edition, there is stuff that affects age. For example, horrifying visage from a ghost. It can age you. So what does that mean? So what I landed on was, I said, well, all of your physical abilities, uh, including initiative and attack rolls, and any saving throws involving strength, dexterity, or constitution are at disadvantage because they had doubled in age from like 40 to 80. Um, and I think that's where I left stuff at. I didn't, subtract from stats or anything like that. That in the old days of D&D, older editions, the older you got, you would get minuses on certain stats. So, but I didn't do that. And then somebody, man, I wish I would have written down who gave this tip. If you're watching this video, make sure to comment below and take credit for it. Uh, they mentioned the exhaustion rule, which I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. So in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I'm pretty sure it's in Dungeon Master's Guide, there's levels of exhaustion. And if you get too exhausted, you can actually die. I don't suggest doing that with an age character, but there's like 6 levels of exhaustion. And I just gave that character, I said, you also have an extra level of exhaustion by default. So that's kind of where we left it, which I think is a pretty good way to do it. But I would like to see that, codified in the actual rules by the developers. But anyway, moving on. It wasn't a major deal. So that was just one other thing we did on the aging issue. So again, I always welcome your comments and thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. Love to read your comments and posts on these videos. So they had basically just well, no, actually, last video, my bad, they had moved on and they had fought the room that was full of what you call it, the animated statues. So I talked at length last video, I think, about the aging, but I think something I did in addition to that for this video was the exhaustion rule. So yeah, they had the horrifying visage, and then the character decided not to go back and get greater restoration from the cleric, and they pushed on. This is last video, and they fought the animated statues to the point where they had to retreat out of that cave. So they were still thinking maybe the Medusa was in that room, but what they decided to do was leave that room for the moment and go, and they're doing a very methodical next one, kind of going, they're not just randomly choosing. They're it's okay. The next thing to the left, go there. Next thing to the left, go there. So the next thing to the left, as it were, from their perspective, was a tunnel that they followed down, and it led them back into the residential area of the Rockblight. It's a big, long, open area, and up at the top of that area is where they encountered the ghost, but they didn't go farther down. And now they came around to the lower part of it, where there's like a waterfall, and you can go up some steps on either side of the waterfall, and there's a room up there that has some gargoyles. Now they didn't go up. They went okay, and then they retraced their steps back, and then they went next left, and that next left happened to be another interesting room. Okay, but before they did all that, all right, they did go back. They finally decided to go back out now that they had stayed there a long enough time to save face, basically. And they went back out, and they went to, is it Gurnup Tapfinger? Yeah, Gurnup Tapfinger, the head priest of Caladuran, Smooth Hands at the Speaking Stones. And they basically said, hey, we sure would like some greater restoration here for our party member. And what they ended up doing was both characters, the tiefling that got aged and the wood elf that got aged, both opted to have greater restoration cast to take care of their aging effect. Now, again, the elf was not affected anywhere near as much as the tiefling, but they both decided to do it. After much research, and I even had input from people watching these videos, and in my own research and thinking, what I landed on, I said each spell of each time greater restoration is cast will be 500 gold pieces. Okay, because once again, 5th edition doesn't have, I mean, they say like a first or second level spell catch cost X amount. And then after that, it's just more. But it doesn't really say how much more, so it's up to the DM. So I landed on 500 gold pieces. Uh, and they decided to have it cast twice for 1,000 gold pieces. So, and they had roughly 900 gold pieces plus some gems and stuff like that. So they were able to, pay for it without a huge problem. Um, Now, Gurna did offer, because he had told them, if you'll go cleanse the temple that's in the Rockblight, which they haven't done yet, but if you'll go cleanse it, um, then, I will offer you basically a blessing or a boon. And now what they don't know is that that blessing or boon is really cool. It's, oh, he will bestow a blessing of protection or a blessing of weapon on each of the characters. Um, but they don't know that. They don't know what that's going to be. So I've just said he's going to offer you like a blessing or a boon if you know, finish his quest. So so he said I can either, you know, offer you these greater restorations, and then assuming that you finish the task, the characters that receive that will not get the blessing or the boon, or you can pay. And they decided to pay. So, but that was a choice I gave them if they didn't want to spend that much gold on getting the restorations cast. So and they went back and they were talking. There's the guard captain just outside of the Rockblight, and they did give him information on the Medusa, like proof of the Medusa. Um, and so he gave them there's two rewards he will offer. One is let's see if I can find the guy here. It's at the overlook. No, dang it. Where's the staging area? That's it. So he said Sark, who's the leader of the guards, asked them to find out whatever they can about the Medusa. He offers a payment of 50 gold pieces per character for useful information, plus a diamond worth 1,000 gold pieces if they bring back proof that the Medusa is dead. So they basically brought the head of one of the animated statues that they fought and brought it to him and described, we're pretty sure there's a Medusa in there. There's a room full of this statues. We think we're getting closer. Da, da, da. But I basically allowed that because they were like, is that sufficient to get the initial reward? And I was like, okay, yeah, I went ahead and let them get the 50 gold pieces per reward for that, for confirming, yeah, the Medusa seems to still be active in there. And oh, by the way, you've got a room full of animated statues in there, so be aware of that. So I went ahead and allowed that. Um, so, other DMs may not. They may maybe want more proof or helpful information. I think if you bring them those crystals, there's a room full of crystals that you could pop these crystals off, and they're kind of hazy, and you look through them, and they will give you advantage versus the Medusa's petrification gaze, but you get disadvantage while you're fighting. I'm pretty sure it says in the book if you bring one of those to him, that definitely qualifies. But anyway, and they found that room with the crystals. They found that last session before they fought all the animated statues. Um, and it's interesting that even though there's a lot of clues in the book about these crystals, I don't believe any of the players used the crystals while they were fighting the Medusa, because they did fight the Medusa later in this session. So they went back in. Like I said, they had explored further down in the residential area of the Rockblight, got down to the waterfall that had the steps up on either side of the waterfall. They didn't go up there, so they were about to go into the next room, which just happens to be Nahidra's lair, which is Nahidra is the Medusa. Okay, before I get into all that, I want to talk a little bit about marching order. I had a little fun with the players, uh, before they went, when they went back and got healed, and then they were going, back into the Rockblight area. Blingdenstone itself is not super safe, and you can have a lot of random encounters. And I rolled a random encounter of a black pudding. So what I did was the characters had not given me a marching order, and they haven't at any point in quite a while said, "Here's our default marching order." They'll just put stuff down on the map when when I say okay. Every now and then they'll say, "What's your marching order?" And they hadn't given me one, and so they encountered this black pudding, and I was like, and I said, "Well," and I set up their marching order for them. And they were like, "Oh, and I put the bard and the cleric up front on purpose. Um, and I didn't expect them to die or anything like that, and they didn't. But I was kind of having fun, but also kind of making a point. It's like, make sure I know what your marching order is. Um, and I was like, they were like, we would never. I was like, well, you guys weren't expecting trouble. And but then I just kind of laughed and said, I'm going to have a little fun as a DM since you didn't tell me what your marching order was. And I put the clerics up front, the cleric and the bard, and then set up whatever. And there's the black pudding right in front of them. And there's actually, I was bragging on my players last session on their creativity with miniatures. I've really come to depend on them for that. And one of the players pulled out a big black rock and dropped it, and that was the black pudding, which I thought worked really well. And I asked him, I said, "Do you have that on purpose for black puddings?" And he said, "No, I've got it for," and I can't remember what the reason was that he said that he had it, but it worked well in this instance. And I'll put a picture of that up. So I thought it worked really well. Anyway, they defeated the black pudding. It gave them more of a challenge. The other black puddings they fought so far in this adventure were in that temple where they met Globagul, the sentient uh, gelatinous cube. But in that instance, the black puddings were down in pits, so they were just dropping stuff and hammering stuff and killing the black puddings while they were down in the pits. And so this was a full-on black pudding up on them, and so it was a little bit more challenging. It even got to the point where it did split. I think somebody used lightning on it, and the player was like, "I know out of character that lightning is not good to use on black puddings, but my character doesn't know that, and it's one of my main offensive spells." So they blasted it with lightning, ended up splitting it into two smaller black puddings. Anyway, they ended up defeating the black puddings, so that was fun. Um, Back into the Rockblight they went, uh, and I think they did do a long rest at the foaming mug. Had them roll. I remembered to have them roll. Um, I'm giving them a 10% chance of less while they're in the Underdark, not to get rested on a long rest or get their spells back and stuff because of the madness and the nightmares. And the longer they stay, I'm going to slowly start ratcheting that up. So eventually it's going to go 20%, then 30%, then 40%. And one, I like that mechanic to reflect how bad the Underdark is getting with the nightmares and the influence of the demon lords. And two, it's a nice encouragement to, because there was even some talk, do we want to go ahead and go to Gauntlet Grim after this? The book and I want them to head to the surface soon. So, but if they can keep staying as long as they want. But I like the idea of giving them a slowly mounting reason, you know, and a reminder that you're not denizens of the Underdark, and you really don't want to be down here. It's bad enough as it is without the demon lords making it worse. So all right, so back into the Rockblight, and uh, long story short, they were methodically going through. There's an area on the map, um, area 19, and it has several branching tunnels and a couple of caverns. Area 21 is where they fought the animated statues, and Area 20 is the Medusa's lair, Nahidra, I believe her name is. Let me double check that. Yeah, Nahidra, who is a drow priestess who, over the years, kept making pacts with dark things and has become a Medusa, and then has kind of teamed up with Ogremok's Bane, which is this sentient cloud of dust, basically, that takes over elementals for its own will, its own nefarious purposes. Um, so they made it, and that's area 20, and then in between 20 and 21 is the little path they took that took them back into the larger area of the abandoned residential area in the Rockblight. So there's nobody living in the Rockblight before. It's basically a mini dungeon within Blingdenstone. So long story short, they walked in Nahedra's lair, and they encountered Nahedra, and they fought Nahedra, and they defeated Nahedra. Now I'll give some notes about fighting Medusas. Um, First of all, let's talk about Medusas and mirrors, because the players had bought some mirrors. When the guard before they went into the Rockblight, the guard said, there's a Medusa in there, and we want more information. They went to the market area, Trader's Grotto, I think it's called, and they bought mirrors. Now, the way they were using the mirrors was, as soon as they realized they were dealing with a Medusa, they were trying to look at the Medusa through the mirror and fight the mirror, or fight the Medusa. Now, let me read the petrifying gaze from the Medusa. Okay, I think it's important to understand how this works. Okay, petrifying gaze. When a creature that can see the Medusa's eyes starts its turn within 30 feet of the Medusa can force it to make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw if the Medusa isn't incapacitated and can see the creature. If the saving throw fails by 5 or more, the creature is instantly petrified. Otherwise, a creature that fails the save begins to turn to stone and is restrained. The restrained creature must repeat the saving throw at the end of its next turn, becoming petrified on a failure or ending the effect on a success. The petrification lasts until the creature is freed by the greater restoration spell or other magic. Unless surprised, a creature can avert its eyes to avoid the saving throw at the start of its turn. If the creature does so, it can't see the Medusa until the start of its next turn, when it can avert its eyes again. If the creature looks at the Medusa in the meantime, it must immediately make a save. If the Medusa sees itself reflected on a polished surface within 30 feet of it and in an area of bright light, the Medusa is, due to its curse, affected by its own gaze. So it doesn't say that looking at the Medusa through a mirror protects you from its gaze. It says if it can see your eyes, or if you can see its eyes. And if you're looking through a mirror, you can see its eyes. So I think a lot of, at least, my thought on this, and I'm guessing some of my players, in the old Clash of the Titans movie, not the remake, but the old one from the 80s, and I haven't even seen the remake, so maybe this was in the remake too, the hero, Perseus, I believe his name is, uses a shield as a mirror to kind of see the Medusa and kind of fight the Medusa and use, but at the same time somewhat be protected from its gaze. So I think in a lot of players' minds, including mine, if I hadn't gone and read this petrifying gaze ability for the Medusa, would assume that would protect you, because it's our head canon, right? Head canon is what that's how you see things working without even really thinking about it. But I ruled that that's not the case. And they did their first round, they were doing the mirrors and all that. And then I, which is a little bit of metagaming, but I allowed it because maybe, just in general, Forgotten Realms living, you have heard that works or something, and that, that Medusas can petrify you. But yeah, the first round, everybody was within 30 feet and doing the mirrors thing, I had them roll a saving throw. And the poor tiefling who just paid 500 gold and the players practically had to bend her fingers backwards to go get her have the spell done in the first place, because she was just dead set on keeping going. Even though you have to do it within 24 hours or you're stuck aged. If you get horrifying visaged, you have to have greater restoration cast within 24 hours. Anyway, so gets restored, pays 500 gold pieces, goes through all that, goes back in, and the next fight gets petrified because they failed their save by 5 or more. That poor player. She was a good sport about it, though. Another player failed, but didn't fail enough to instantly be turned to stone and was petrified, or was restrained. And then the next round, they had to roll, and they were successful, so they broke the effect and did not become stone. And they actually just kept very brazenly fighting the Medusa with spells and making eye contact, and made like a couple of more successful rolls and was not turned to stone. But that character is very brazen and in a lot of ways instrumental to defeating the Medusa. So the characters, I think one of the characters towards the end of the fight kind of started fiddling with the little gem, because there's a crystal cave, crystal garden in area 19 that's right outside the Medusa's cavern cave, that you get pop these crystals off, you look through them, and it'll give you advantage against her save or against her gaze. Gives you disadvantage while you're fighting. So, but I think one of the characters right towards the end started kind of fiddling with that. But by then it didn't make a bunch of difference. The other thing, one of the things that helped our characters in this case was we had, because the Medusa starts the fight within, in the center of the cave. And I had a couple of characters that were, or players that were just outside of 30 feet that could do range stuff, like spells and whatnot. So they were able to just keep peppering the Medusa without having to worry about the gaze. Even though I think the first round had everybody save, and then or roll the save, and I was pointing out, hey, they're outside of 30 feet, and I said, you're right. So, feel free to correct your DM, but do it gently, because sometimes they're not sometimes, they're probably not trying to cheat. They just have a lot of stuff they're keeping up with in their head, and we miss stuff too. So I never mind a player saying, hey, doesn't the rule say da-da-da? And then I'll step back and think about that. What I don't like is saying, well, you can't do that because do. And I'm like, okay, man, simmer down. It's cool. I'm not trying to be a jerk. And that doesn't happen a whole lot. So, but it does happen in gaming. I know that happens. People, they think they're in a courtroom and they objection, and they really get passionate with the DM or the GM. They fought the Medusa, defeated it, and the reason the Medusa never moved up closer into 30 feet is because two characters rushed up on the Medusa and engaged the Medusa in melee combat and kept the Medusa from moving forward. So that helped out a lot. It also helped the characters. The Medusa rolled horribly because the Medusa gets multiple attacks. It gets a melee attack and a ranged attack, and the snake hair gets a couple of attacks. And the Medusa rolled horribly. I don't even think maybe hit once. I think hit like one time. So the monk rolled up and basically started blind fighting. And then the rogue, literally blind rogue, rolled up and was able to fight and not have to worry about the petrifying gaze effect. So remember, there was some discussion a couple of videos ago about how do you handle the blind rogue and what abilities do they get. Remember, and I'm not making light of being blind in real life. Okay? I can't even imagine what that's like. In game terms, there are some bonuses to being blind. For example, you can roll up on a Medusa and don't have to worry about the gaze effect. So they fought the Medusa. They ended up defeating the Medusa by, taking her hit points down to nothing. But there was an attempt to get the Medusa to look at itself in its own, see its own gaze in a reflected surface, which will probably happen with your players. Here's how I handled that. I said the Medusa's not an idiot and then just going to go, oh, there's a mirror, let me look in it, right? So I said, you can use it if you have a mirror or reflective surface, I will let you do a deception check to try to get the Medusa to look. I'm not just going to make it an attack roll, it's going to be a deception check. It's going to be an opposed roll. You get a deception attempt, and the Medusa gets an insight check to try to realize what you're doing and not look. So a couple of questions came out about that. One of the monk that rolled up on her was a tiefling and has some sort of ability to turn its eyes into a mirror kind of reflective surface. and asked if they could use that. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, yeah, but you're going to have to do a deception check. I'm not just going to let you use like a class ability or a racial ability to instantly and automatically defeat a Medusa. I'm just not going to allow that. Hey, look at my eyes. You're petrified. No. Not unless there's just an amazingly compelling reason why that should work. In the middle of combat, where there's all this stuff going on, uh, it's going to have to be a deception check. Now, I thought that was a clever question from the player, but as a DM, I got to balance out. Uh, that would be a massively powerful racial ability if you could just roll up on a Medusa and it looks at you and uh, petrifies itself. So, that's pretty powerful. So anyway, that was how I ruled that. Other DMs may rule differently, but there was a cool moment in the game where the Medusa was swinging its sword and fumbled, so I ruled that the Medusa dropped its sword. So the monk was like, I'm going to drop my mirror on top of the sword so that when she reaches down to pick the sword back up, maybe she'll get petrified. And I said, man, that's great. I love that idea. So we did a deception check. The player rolled really well on deception, but unfortunately, the Medusa rolled better on insight and was able to defeat the deception check and was not petrified. But I thought that would have been amazing if it worked. But anyway, that's how I'm handling that. It says if the Medusa sees itself reflected on a polished surface within 30 feet of it and in an area of bright light, the Medusa is, due to its curse, affected by its own gaze. But there's no real rules here that I see on how to get the Medusa to look at a mirror. So again, a deception check, I think, is the best way to go about that. So they defeated the Medusa. Uh, they've got the tiefling is petrified, so it looks like another greater restoration spell is coming. And that's where we ended things. Uh, and I gave them a little bit of backstory on the Medusa. I said, just because they were curious about the Medusa and why is there drow, furnishings and stuff in here. And I said, look, there's no way for you to really know this, but now that it's a moot point, I just shared with them that, the backstory in the book. And, we had a discussion before the game about spoilers, talking about playing Skyrim, and one of my players was like, spoilers! I was like, well, that's not really a spoiler, because you've already fought the Medusa and it doesn't really come into it anymore in the book, right? Because I didn't mention the part about her striking a bargain with Ogre Moxbane. I just mentioned that she was a drow priestess who led a party of drow into the Rockblight area, and then over time, was wanting more and more power, made pacts with dark things, became a Medusa, and then petrified her own people. So let me see if I've missed anything else here. Oh yeah, they have enough XP now for 5th level. So I told them, I said, go ahead and, calculate your next level, and at your next long rest, you will get the benefits of the next level. So now they're 5th level. I've got to get them to at least 6th, but hopefully 7th before I take them out and get them ready because again, Out of the Abyss is split into 2 parts. So anyway, that's what happened this week. Welcome your thoughts and comments. I appreciate you so much for watching. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate any thumbs up and comments you can leave on the video. And don't forget to check out my review of Volo's Guide to Monsters. I'm very impressed with this. Anyway, thanks so much for watching Shane Plays, and we'll catch you next time.